Namaste and welcome to Gap. Let's complete. Today we will discuss why ISRO's SSLV mission failed in last stage. But before we start, let's understand what is SSLV. Also, in the end, we will explain you about SSLV, PSLV and GSLV. So, SSLV is Small Satellite Launch Vehicle, which is a small lift launch vehicle developed by New Space India Limited. SSLV's height is 34 meter, diameter is 2 meter, with a mass of 120 ton, has 3 plus 1 stages, which can go up to altitude of 500 km with a payload of 500 kg. Manufacturing cost is 30 crore, which is around 3.8 million US dollars, which take assemble time of 72 hours and need 6 manpower. So we can see in this two picture how assembly of SSLV is done by our ISRO scientist. SSLV is made keeping low cost turnaround time in mind with launch on demand flexibility under minimal infrastructure requirement. The maiden flight SSLV was conducted on 7th August 2022 from the first launch pad of Sriharikota in Andhra Pradesh. The SSLV was developed with the aim of launching small satellites commercially at drastically reduced price and higher launch rate as compared to PSLV. So we can see here the picture of fully assembled SSLV. In the future, a dedicated launch site called SSLV Launch Complex in Tamil Nadu will handle SSLV launches to sun synchronous orbit. Now we will know which two satellites were carried by SSLV. So it carried Azadi-Sat and EOS-02. First, we will understand about what is Azadi-Sat. Azadi-Sat was an Indian Earth Observation 8U CubeSat weighing around 8 kg developed by Space Kids India as a test payload on the SSLV. It was created to mark India's 75th year of independence, which is why the name is Azadi. Azadi Sat was developed by schoolgirls from Central schools across India. 10 girls from each school were involved, so total of 750 students were involved in this project. It carried 75 different payloads, each weighing around 50 grams and conducting femto experiments. Girl students from rural regions across the country were provided guidance to build these payloads. The payloads were integrated by the student team of Space Kids India. The mission was created to give girls from lower income backgrounds the opportunity to learn the fundamentals of space flight as a part of the United Nations theme of Women in Space. Now, what is EOS-02? EOS-02 was an Indian Earth observation microsatellite developed by the ISRO as a test payload on the SSLV. The objective behind EOS-02 was to realize and fly an experimental imaging satellite with shorter turnaround time to showcase launch of on-demand capability. It was intended to be used for cartographic applications at a cadastral level, urban and rural management, coastal land use and regulation, utilities mapping, development and various other GIS applications. The satellite carried two payloads, a mid-wavelength and a long-wavelength infrared camera with a 6M resolution. Why SSLV mission failed? SSLV D1 was launched from the launchpad in Sriharikota at around 9:18 a.m. on Sunday. The progress of the rocket launch was smooth and successful as all the solid fuel powered engines performed normally. As per the flight plan, the launch vehicle was supposed to deliver the two satellites on board into a orbit a little over 12 minutes into its voyage. It first had to dispatch the EOS-02 satellite and then the other the ASAT a few seconds after it. The mission was completed with all stages of the rocket performing as per ISRO's expectation. However, there is a small data loss in the terminal stage of the rocket. The failure of the mission appears to have been the result of a faulty sensor. So, the objective of ISRO scientists was to launch the satellites in polar orbit, which is this orbit which goes from North Pole to South Pole, right? But due to some issue in the sensor, the satellites were launched in elliptical orbit or geostationary orbit, right? So the satellites would not remain in such an orbit for a very long time, and eventually it will come down from the orbit. So both the satellites, AzaDsat and EOS-02, are no more usable. Figure 1 shows how the satellites in polar orbit works. This orbit is used for Earth mapping, intelligence or military satellite, and figure 2 shows how satellite in geostationary orbit works. This orbit is used for communication, meteorology and navigation satellites. Now we will understand how many launchers does ISRO have. So ISRO have around 4 launchers. First one is SSLV, second one is PSLV, third one is GSLV Mark II, and fourth one is GSLV Mark IV. So all these 4 satellites are used by ISRO's to deploy different kinds of satellites into space. Now we will understand what is SSLV. SSLV, it is the smallest launch vehicle and weighs only 110 tons. It is reported that the SSLV has a height of 34 meters and has 3 solid stages. It has lift-off mass of the launch vehicle of approximately 120 tons. What is PSLV? PSLV is Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, which is the third generation launch vehicle of India. It is the first Indian launch vehicle to be equipped with liquid stages. After its first successful launch in October 1994, PSLV emerged as the reliable and versatile workhorse launch vehicle of India with 39 consecutively successful missions by June 2017. So from 1994 to 2017, the vehicle has launched 48 Indian satellites and 209 satellites for customers from abroad. What is GSLV? GSLV is Geosynchronous Satellite Launch Vehicle, which is the largest launch vehicle developed by India, which is currently in operation. This fourth generation launch vehicle is a 3-stage vehicle with 4 liquid strap-ons. The indigenously developed cryogenic upper stage, which is flight proven, forms the third stage of GSLV Mark III. From January 2014, the vehicle has achieved 6 consecutive successes. The GSLV height is 49.13 meter and it is divided into 3 stages. Its lift-off mass is 414.75 tons. So now we will understand what is the use of PSLV and GSLV. So PSLV, which is Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, is used to launch satellite in the polar orbit. In this picture you can see the polar orbit, right? So to launch satellites in this orbit, ISRO use this PSLV, right? Now GSLV, which is Geosynchronous Satellite Launch Vehicle, is used to launch satellite in the geostationary orbit, which is this orbit, right? So ISRO uses GSLV in this orbit to launch the satellites. Now the distance from Earth to this orbit, geostationary orbit, is around 36,000 km, and the distance from Earth to this polar orbit is around 600 kilometers. So you can say this PSLV has a range of around 600 kilometers from the Earth, and GSLV has a range of around 36,000 kilometers from the Earth. So after the failure of SSLV D1, ISRO is determined that it will come back soon with SSLV D2. And all the best to ISRO for its SSLV D2 program. This brings to the end of our today's discussion. I hope I have been able to make you understand the topic. Thank you for your time. Stay safe and stay happy.